Hey, everybody. I'm Mark Williams. I'm delighted to be here to host and facilitate this fireside chat to talk about a really fascinating story related to EVRAZ Steel, their growth in Pueblo, Colorado, and the injection of solar and green into the whole equation. So it's a really interesting story. I've been in the site selection business for 30 years. I'm not a solar expert, but I hope maybe with you all, I'll become one as part of this session. With us today, we have two distinguished guests. Jeff Shaw is president and CEO of the Pueblo Economic Development Corporation, PEDCO for the local people. And Jeff and his team were instrumental in the story that's going to be told today about a massive expansion and a massive solar installation that facilitated that expansion. And also with us is David Ferryman. David is a senior VP at EVRAZ, but he's running the show over there. He has an interesting background. He's a professional engineer and has spent a great deal of his time in the rail industry. And one of the main products at the mill is rail, and we'll talk about that. So welcome to Jeff and David. We've got a couple of slides that Jeff and David are going to review, and then I'm going to ask them some questions about the project. We're going to go back and forth. The format is a fireside chat, but we're going to try to have an interesting, maybe humorous interaction and talk about the key aspects of this project, and hopefully from a site selection or economic development perspective, you all can gather from that. So we're going to chat for 45 minutes, and then at the end, we're going to have 15 minutes of questions from the site selection economic development audience to make sure we got everything covered. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff and David just to give us a high-level overview of this incredible project. Please, gentlemen.
So yeah, well, thank you. So I appreciate, Mark. Thanks for hosting this, Janet, put it together, and everybody else taking time out of their day because everybody's very busy. So this is kind of the end result. So one of the most complicated, if not the most complicated projects we've ever worked on in Pueblo County, which is, we've been doing this for about 40 years. But the end of the day, the total project, and there's a lot of moving pieces that we'll go through in some of the questions and answering with Mark, but at the end of the day, it was a $500 million expansion of a long rail mill. I'll let David explain what a long rail mill is versus the short rail mill. That gets out of my expertise, but I've learned a lot about it, but including $200 million in equipment, fixed assets. The project also had a tax increment financing piece to it that was bonded at about $75 million. It was a combination, for the most part, of a retention project, while there was potential some expansion, but about 1,000 jobs were fully guaranteed to the city of Pueblo. We also are utilizing, because in today's world where customized training and workforce and talent is going a long ways, we carved out $800,000 in dollars for training, working with the Pueblo Community College. And then as far as the cash incentives, at least from the local cash incentives, for capital purposes, we're $15 million from what we call our half-cent economic development fund. So we'll talk about it a little bit further.
My name's David Ferryman, and we'll get into a lot of details, I think, here about the long rail mill and solar, but just some highlights. They're really two different things, but they're so closely linked to the overall success of what's happening here, because without both the involvement of PEDCO and other government agencies that have supported this, combined with what happened here with the solar project, without those two things together, I don't think this new long rail mill would be being built right here in Pueblo, Colorado. So it truly is a success story on the solar side of things, what we call the Bighorn Solar Project. It's really a partnership that we're one player in. EVRAZ is the steel company. We have the land, the majority of the land on which this solar farm sits on. Xcel Energy is a big partner in this, as well as Light Source BP is the solar branch of it. They developed it. It's a 300 megawatt solar farm, and clearly it's a win for everybody. At the end of the day, for Xcel, it kept us as their largest customer here in Colorado. We're the largest energy consumer in the state of Colorado. I don't think that's something people would brag about in the past, but as we move to renewable energy, it's something that we're proud to be a part of. Light Source BP, it expanded their renewable energy infrastructure as a part of British Petroleum. Certainly, it's a direction that they're headed as a company. And as EVRAZ, some land that really wasn't being used that we owned. And for us, we got out of it was a more affordable and predictable energy rate. So a 20-year purchase power agreement with Xcel Energy. I don't know that I have to go into detail here. Obviously, it's clean, renewable power, price for the next 20 years for us. But it abates about 433,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions. And that's the equivalent of taking, I think there might be a bit of a typo here, I think it's a little over 92,000 fuel burning cars off the road each year.
Great. Well, let me ask you guys a few questions and generate some conversation. First, David, really fascinating reading about EVRAZ and its history. I mean, I thought I saw that EVRAZ and its companies came to Pueblo in maybe the 1870s. I mean, this is over 100-year history. Usually we think of solar, at least I've thought of solar as a new thing for a new business, for a new situation. Well, it appears that this is a unique blend of history and the old and the new and keeping your business going and so on and so forth. And I got to tell you, we locate steel mills in our business and have located a few in the last 20 years. And 15 or 20 years ago, we were trying to figure out how to avoid solar locations, not how to incorporate them. So this is a fantastic change. Tell us just a little bit from your perspective on the history of EVRAZ Steel, why you're in Pueblo, where you are worldwide, just a brief backgrounder for everybody so they know what you're all about. And you're the North American arm of that, as I understand it.
That's correct. Yeah. A little on myself. I'm not a steelmaker by trade. I'm a railroader. I spent 27 years in the railway industry, but the two are very closely linked. This facility in Pueblo, Colorado is largely here because of the railway business. And I'm fourth generation in that business. So when I grew up, my dad was chief engineer of the Burlington Northern in Denver at one point. I knew a lot about Pueblo because I used to go out and ride with my dad. We'd come down here and meet with the people at the steel mill and the local railroad offices. Pueblo is Steel City. It's a integral part of this community and why this community is here today. It was originally formed in 1872. So do the math, that'll be 150 years in about a month and a half that it's been here, that we'll be celebrating next year. It was called Central Colorado Improvement Company when it was formed 150 years ago. And it became Colorado Fuel and Iron in 1892, which was called CF&I. And it held that name for a long, long time. The individual credited with starting the company is General William Jackson Palmer. And if you're from Colorado, you see the name Palmer a lot around Colorado. So a real instrumental pioneer in this area, so to speak, military general. Rail began in 1881, and it's been consistently made ever since right here in Pueblo. It helped build the West. Started really with the DNRGW, Denver, Rio Grande, and Western Railway, which is now part of the Union Pacific Railroad. For your railroad buffs, was actually owned by Phil Anschutz for a period of time there before it was sold to Union Pacific. But it was the center of that railway construction. And today, the steel mill still remains the center of two of our major railroads in North America, the two largest actually, Burlington Northern Santa Fe and Union Pacific. So it's ideally situated. We don't just sell to them; we sell to all the railroads in North America. But really a nice location in the center of the West. This location was chosen largely because of water, the Arkansas River, the St. Charles Rivers, and access to mining and minerals in this area too, along with the ideal route on the railroad. So 1957, we had over 22,000 employees. It was basically a town across the street where the steel mill sits. And I won't go into all the details, but in 1993, it became Oregon Steel. They purchased it coming out of bankruptcy. We had a few down years there, but 1998, it became known as Rocky Mountain Steel. And in 2006, it was purchased by EVRAZ, became EVRAZ North America. We have 1,100 employees today that work at this location. And one thing I like to say is 150 years ago, we were a diverse employer before that was even a thing. People came from all over the world to work here, from all parts of Europe, Mexico, native population. They employed women in our schools and our hospitals here that were part of the campus, I'll call it. But diverse then and diverse now, really a true American success story.
Hey, David, I've just never heard anything like that for that long. I guess one point I want to make, you're making rail. I think you're also making seamless pipe, correct?
That's correct.
Correct. And are those the two major products there?
We make also rod and bar. So people are like, well, what's rod? Well, it's pretty much any wire product. So could be wire, could be cables, could be tire cord, tire bead in your tires, suspension cables. In fact, the Brooklyn Bridge was made out of wire cable that was produced here. So rebar products also. Okay.
Give everybody a quick overview of the process. I believe you're a melt shop. You're melting scrap and forming steel from that. Just a quick overview of how that works, and what are the critical infrastructure or resource requirements that you have for that? You mentioned water, electricity is obviously important, but for those that are on the call that aren't familiar with arc furnace steel making, just give them a quick picture of how that works and what's important.
Yeah. So this facility was a blast furnace until the early 1970s. And there are still blast furnaces in the world today. Obviously, you have to have access to mining, minerals, and coke and coal and things like that to be able to run a blast furnace. But the wave of the future really has been what they call mini mills or electric arc furnace. And that's what we have here today. We consume 97% recycled products. So we are the largest recycler in the state of Colorado. We melt the equivalent of over 1.5 million cars per year, shredded car vehicles. So 97% recycled products. The other 3% is really made up in alloys to get the steel the way we want it. Other consumables would be clearly energy that we've been talking about here today. So electricity and labor. So we have consumables, energy, labor. We have a melt shop that melts all that recycled product down. It produces blooms or billets, and then those get rolled into other products in each of our 3 rolling mills.
So when do you suspect the concept of using solar energy to be a major resource in your mill came on the EVRAZ radar? When was that?
I have to admit, I was a bit doubtful myself, much like you, when I first heard of this. Now, I've only been with EVRAZ about 4 years now, so this predates me. that it goes back, but I know it's something the teams have been working on for, gosh, Jeff, you probably know better than I do.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jeff?
Several years. Yeah.
Well, I can tell it from our perspective, it was really related to, it was a perfect storm that was hitting. And so I think my understanding, EVRAZ had been looking at it, but we started looking at it, the project in 2017-ish, late 16, early 17, it was when Xcel Energy was looking at their overall Colorado plan, and there was a proposed closure of two of the coal-fired facilities. And we knew that other communities were using electricity prices against the state of Colorado. And so it really created an opportunity to do a project like this. And it was really, it was led by, mainly by obviously Xcel's and EVRAZ's great leadership. But I think it was in our opinion, it was a solution that was crafted based on circumstances that were being presented, both external and internal, but trying to go more renewable and green as a state. But also in relation to how can we establish a project or put together the project so you have good low cost price certainty with reliability, and solar just fit that model.
So low cost price certainty and green energy weren't mutually exclusive. Right. Somehow or another, your utilities and EVRAZ worked out their. It's a melt shop, right, David? I mean, I'm going to be kind of crude here. I mean, you take a bucket, you put a bunch of scrap in it and some chemicals, and you stick an electrode down in it, and you turn it on. I mean, so the load is not as smooth as some others. So you work that out too, which is fantastic. Yeah,
and from what I understand, Jeff was a big player in helping us with that partnership, kind of us working with Xcel. Clearly everybody had their something they were trying to get out of it. But, at the end of the day, other locations were being considered for this new long rail mill outside of the state of Colorado. And that was serious. Coming from the railroad industry, I can tell you, there were some other locations that we as railroaders had even piped in on because they wanted it on their network, right? But right. At the end of the day, we had a nice steel source here. We had something already that was set up and built, and we really wanted to keep here. But that energy being our largest, one of our largest costs, could be prohibitive at times. So I think without this formal agreement arrangement, it really had our company looking and considering other locations.
Right. Hey, Jeff, tell kind of the economic development success side of the story. We've got a mill. It's got some resource issues. They want to stay. You had a team, you formed a team. Who was on that team? I've heard great things about training. I've heard great things. I watched the video of the announcement yesterday, which was quite interesting in terms of all your public officials and participating. Just take a couple of minutes and tell the economic development side of the story, how this worked. You mentioned to me this morning this was the most complex project in 40 years, and David, that's all okay. Don't worry about that. But tell the story so we can all learn from it a little bit from your perspective.
Sure, I'll try to keep it as brief. So as presented to us, it was, as David pointed out, you have this long history of a steelmaker in the community that historically operates in the county and not in the city. So we have a situation where we have other states that are trying to, as we say in our world, steal our projects, steal our companies, but nevertheless, we know that world. But so we had an opportunity to keep it here. And the way we looked at it is, okay, they've been here for 150 years. If we can do this the right way, we can hopefully keep them here for 100 years because we still love steelmaking and it's in our blood. And
it's a key part of your economy, right? Absolutely. I mean, it's an absolute key part of your economy.
Yeah. So we did it. The economic impact on the even before we looked at expansion was over a $300 million type impact to the community. And so when we looked at it globally, we knew what our problems were necessarily. We knew electricity, as we just talked about, was being played by other states. We have, historically, steelmaking operation, has some issues associated with it regarding, the previous technologies and some cleanup type operations. But we knew we had to bring some incentives to the table. Pueblo is unique in the state of Colorado. We've got some significant economic development incentives where we've been taxing ourselves since 1985, a half cent of all non-exempt items put into a capital development fund. So we have an incentive fund that we can tap into. But the problem that was surfaced was, okay, but we can only do it in the county. So we had a steel operation that we had to annex a portion of it into the city. Obviously, we didn't want to annex the entire portion of it. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the needs for this were, to put in such a significant project on EVRAZ's project on land included not even getting to the solar side of it, included some cleanup operations. So it became apparent to us that not only did we have to get creative with our incentive fund on annexing a portion of the steel property, which historically the steel industry didn't ever want to be annexed, right? They didn't want to be in the city, nor did the city want them in. Right. So we had to solve that conversation first and carved out that portion of it. So we went through an annexation process to grab a portion of the facility, or at least the land that they're going to build the land on. And then it became apparent to help with the significant cost. We've had success using tax increment financing on previous projects. So we thought, okay, how can we bring a TIF project into this, recognizing that it's, for the most part, between us, it's a single user type TIF, although, but it's also from a perspective, we got to be careful how we do with the TIF, because at least in Colorado, it's sensitive to other taxing partners. So we had to bring in all our other taxing partners, whether the school district, library district, city, county, and a kind of a smaller water user to sign off on the TIF in order to be able to do that. So it wasn't going to be a TIF that was going to be just financed at time. We know that EVRAZ wanted the dollars up front because they had significant capital dollars up front. So it was a situation we had to bond it. So, navigating the bonding market and figure out when to sell bonds, not to sell bonds. You're going through the COVID, it was a very delicate time. And then to complicate it also, it actually started also with really a state project as well, because in 2007, the state of Colorado, in anticipation of the project, passed some legislation to help monetize some of the state tax credits that are available, because EVRAZ wouldn't be able to benefit for some of those tax credits that the state typically puts into place. So we had a situation, the project, why I say it was so complicated, because you had a community that was going to be decommissioning some coal-fired plants the sole purpose of those coal-fired units is to serve EVRAZ. So they were built to serve then Colorado Fuel and Iron EVRAZ. So Xcel Energy only has one customer in the city of Pueblo and county of Pueblo, and that's EVRAZ. So with all these, I guess, obstacles, created this opportunity that really, if it wasn't for all these kind of moving pieces to it, we might not be able to craft that solution that David pointed out, that without the solar project, without the ability and the community's appetite, it was easy for us to sell the conversation on a TIF to the taxing partners, because we have to be honest, for 150 years they've been making steel. That means sooner, within the population of everybody in the taxing partners had family that worked at the steel mill at some point. Right. So it's because it's in our blood, because it's something we're always excited about. It turned into a pre-expansion economic impact of $300 million to a $500 million impact. So it was a complicated process. But it was obviously critical to us. It created my organization, I say, we've been around since 1981, but, when the steel industry crashed, we had our unemployment went to 24-25%, like most steel making communities in the country. We've diversified our manufacturing base, but it's part of our past, present, and future, to be honest with you.
Right. So I'm wondering how famous this project made PEDCO from a economic development perspective, in terms of, are you getting inquiries, or how has it impacted your economic development program? Because it's a big win. It's an innovative win. I'm sure the story is being told beyond the community and this fireside chat we're having. So what other impacts have you seen?
The biggest impact is how we've changed and looked at solar, to be candid with you. My experience on solar and our experience solar wasn't that significant prior to this. I used to joke that solar projects really weren't in existence for us because there wasn't a lot of jobs associated with it. But until we saw how it can handle a big, the biggest electric user in the state of Colorado, David's being kind of gentle on that. I mean, it's a big number. So we've looked at it, and what we've talked to other projects, and we looked at our industrial parks, is how we can incorporate this type of a solution or opportunity, especially as our community in the state of Colorado has very aggressive renewable requirements attached to it. So it's allowed us to get out in front of it. It's allowed us to communicate to, both in the community on how we're successful keeping some of our industry, but also how we can bring in industry while moving forward with that collective goal of the renewable requirements on a high accelerated scale.
Sure. David, you mentioned in the beginning you were a little skeptical, I think were your words, of the solar component and how this was all going to work. But now I think it appears you've gone through a conversion of some sort in terms of being positive about it. What, in terms of our audience here, how do you see this concept of light source, BP and XL and you guys, how would this be applied in other situations around the country that might not have been applied 10 or 15 years ago? What's an example of how you see, this model could work in a similar project such as X? Is it another steel mill? Is it a chemical plant? What do you think about that to just stretch it a little bit? What have we learned from this that we can apply elsewhere or in Pueblo, of course?
You're asking me?
I'm asking you, man.
Yeah. Well, skeptical, I guess, because we all grew up seeing some form of solar in our lives, and it was kind of these one-off situations. There might be some person down the street had a solar panel for this or that, but you never saw it really in any heavy industrial use. I think the first place I really saw it in the railway industry was at remote signal locations where they didn't have good power access and things like that. They would have certain aspects of the signal system or whatever tied into solar. So, that was a bit of an eye opener for me. But then, coming here and at first, hearing like most people, you're gonna run a steel mill off of a solar farm. I think it raises a lot of questions. But the technology has come so far, and it's pretty cool technology. We all know we get some crazy storms here in Colorado. That solar farm, if it hails, those panels can shift and turn so that they don't sustain damage during a hailstorm. Right. It's been a real eye opener to me, but I think the technologies, electricity, batteries, you name it, have come so far in I'm going to say the last 50 years that I think a lot more things are possible, and we're only just scratching the surface. And it isn't just solar; it's other forms of renewable energy. Whether it's, some of the railroads are looking at hydrogen-powered locomotives now. It's got us thinking about that. It's got me thinking about other things we can do in Pueblo and partnering with PEDCO and others to become kind of the green spot of the state of Colorado. There's probably more things we could be doing to kind of grow this footprint, so to speak.
What were the biggest, and I'm going to talk about Bighorn, the farm itself. And I was reading, I think I read it had 750,000 solar panels. So again, I'm not in the solar business, but how many acres is that, David? Do you know? That's quite a bit.
I think it's about 1,800 acres. 1,800
acres. Awesome.
And the preponderance is on our land. There is another portion that's on, Jeff probably knows better than I do, on some other land out there. But yeah. Okay.
David, what were some of the biggest surprises? And Jeff, you too, in terms of the solar farm itself and the establishment of the technology and the deal with the utilities, Light Source BP and XL. What were some of in terms of the farm itself, some of the challenges that came up that you didn't anticipate, or some of the opportunities you didn't anticipate?
Well, I think I was surprised by how fast it was constructed. Once all the hard work, negotiating, getting the deal signed, help, Jeff provided us through that process. I wasn't here for the majority of that, or wasn't in the job that was necessarily. We had a nice team here of folks with Jerry Reed and Mustafa Al Shaf and others that worked on it from our end. But I think that was probably the biggest challenge, was just getting everybody on the same page to get the deal done. But the construction itself was like lightning fast. And the other thing I thought was pretty cool when we went to that ribbon cutting here last month was how many young people were there for that worked for any of the number of companies that are just excited about this kind of stuff too. So, at the end of the day, we're not hooked up like directly to the solar farm. It isn't like every light beam is going straight into those electrodes that are melting down the steel. It's really feeding the grid, so to speak, but it's offsetting 90% of what we consume. And it's exciting stuff to actually see it working now.
So from your perspective, I would assume that brings some comfort that it's going into the grid. It's all that electricity, all those electrons going into the grid, but you're getting the stability from the grid that you need. So Jeff, let me ask you the same question. What were the biggest surprises for you in the concept of development of Bighorn or the construction? What surprised you the most?
Well, I mean, obviously we mentioned it before, the easiest one is that that you really can't pull it off. The vastness of the project. When we put it together and we worked on the entire project, when it was presented about the acreage and how they pull it together, and some of the challenges was the land that was usable and not usable. As David mentioned, we had to carve out. We were, at the same time that this was going on, we were expanding one of our rail industrial parks that abuts this area where the solar project would have been. So we were able to carve out, I think, about 150, 200 acres for that overflow. But just the sheer vastness of the project, I'm still, like David mentioned, I'm shocked at how fast they built it. And they had the ribbon cutting, and just to get up on the mountaintop and just see how vast it is. The biggest surprise is that it works, that they were able to come up with a solution. And I shouldn't say a surprise. The challenges were obviously putting the entire project together, but I don't want to say they were necessarily challenges. There's always challenges in our world because you've got to do that, the politicking and how you're dealing with the smoke-filled rooms and certain politicians. But there wasn't really challenges. And I say that because, and part of it goes to your previous question as well. These opportunities exist for other areas too, and how they do it. But my advice to anybody is it worked very well, and it wasn't as challenging as long as you had that kind of real high level support of it. So as David mentioned, you had an incredible team from EVRAZ Pueblo, as well as the Chicago office that was working on this on a high level. You had Excel from top down. So, I mean, it was the president of Excel and the presidents of EVRAZ, and everybody was working together towards that common solution. So there was challenges, but they weren't significant. There's a lot of moving pieces, just juggling them. But at the end of the day, at the very beginning of the project, when we started looking at all the moving pieces of it, there was always a consensus that we're going to get this done. So I guess the biggest surprise is, while I say that now, after thinking back after it about 2 or 3 years, it seems easier than it was, because obviously it took some years off our lives as we went through it. But it was definitely well worthwhile, and it crafted a perfect solution to keep EVRAZ here long term and help Colorado with their renewable requirements.
Hey, that's really helpful, David. I'm going to put you on the spot, but I think you already broke the ground for me earlier, so I'm taking a little liberty with this question. Would your expansion have occurred without Bighorn and the teamwork with Jeff and the other partners? But as far as particularly related to the solar, would it have happened?
I don't think so. I go back about 11 years or I think back about 11 years when I was still with Canadian National Railway. I was their vice president of engineering. So we bought a lot of rail to install in the rail network in Canada, and about a third of our company was in the US. But this was talked about for 10 years, a good 10 years before anything really of substance happened. And there was a lot of doubt within the railway industry that this would actually pull off. And it really took, I think, this partnership, this energy arrangement, all the hard work of working with the local PEDCOs and PURAs and the county, the city, Mayor Gradishar, Governor Polis's office, and probably even before Governor Polis, just navigating the whole political community to get some help on the tax stuff that
right.
Jeff mentioned previously. Without that, I don't think our ownership group and our investors would have made this investment. So it was instrumental to it, and I don't think it would have happened without it.
Our company worked in about 35 states last year, and I got to tell you, you don't find what Jeff and his team did and that interrelationship with state and local government. You don't find that everywhere. So clearly it worked in this case. David, I had one question, and I want to open it up to others for questions. But what's been on my mind as I watched the national debate on the infrastructure bill that was signed by the president recently. Is this an exciting thing for you guys? I'm thinking it might be, but what you're the industry guy. What's your perspective on the infrastructure bill? What's happening?
Yeah, I think like a lot of us, we're still trying to kind of dissect it and understand where most of the benefits going to fall. But clearly, being a company that provides materials to fortify infrastructure is probably a good place to be. I think on the rail side of things, most railroads, freight railroad in North America are freight railroads. They are privately held companies. They invest their own capital annually. So I don't know that there's going to be a big influx of capital to those companies. But where I do anticipate seeing more money flowing is in the transit world. And we're seeing more and more high-speed rail, whether it's in California or Texas, or even projects being talked about. The one that excites me along the Front Range of Colorado, I'd sure like to see a new rail line built for high speed, and we'd sure like to make the rail that they put on a line like that. But also, infrastructure wise, it's roads, it's bridges. That's a lot of rebar, and we produce rebar construction type materials for fabrication here as well. So that's big for us too. So I got to believe, this influx of money and capital for infrastructure is only going to make Pueblo and our business stronger.
Fantastic. Jeff, one more question to you before we get into the other questions. We've got a lot of famous site selectors on the call and some others too. What can site selectors do to learn more about Pueblo? What message do you want them to hear? What do you want the takeaway for them to be from this project and this chat we're having right now?
Well, yeah, especially specific questions on this project, I would encourage anybody to call, or if they're happen to be in Colorado, to stop by, and I'm sure we can get David to give them a tour and see the entire project. I think that would be exciting. I think what I'd like everybody to know is, what we've seen through this project and other projects is how we can come up with creative solutions in this community and working together, to be honest with you. And so, one of the things that David also, we touched on the history of the steel, but, one of the things that makes us very competitive and for our other industries and other locations is the water availability. Because of the age of the steel industry, because we've been around for 150 years or so, that's allowed us to have an incredible supply of great quality water. So we can go after projects that have large water demands, where I'm not going to pick on my friends in the state, but where the rest of the state, I guess I am, they really can't do that. So, we have a lot of great infrastructure in place. You've got Highway 50 and I-25. You got, transportation's easy and access. Competitive utility environments, but really creative solutions. I think you'll see when we were able to put together a project like this that has a 150-year-old steel mill that now has a TIF component to it that's been financed through a TIF that's being powered by solar, that has every generation that's worked through that facility, and we still believe into it. So I think we can come up with a great solution for them, and we can come up with a great solution really for any manufacturer.
Obviously. All right. We've got some questions coming in, and we've got about 15 minutes left. So I'm gonna try to work my technological magic here and pull up some of these questions, if that's okay. This question is from a good friend, Jerry Schotten, and his question is David and all. Jeff, I think you're the all, because I'm not going to answer this question. Mark touched on this. What makes EVRAZ confident the power will be available when the sun is not shining? The grid, I'm reading this, okay? So does Xcel guarantee that electricity will be there? So it's a question of the nighttime thing. That us newbies always ask about.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for Xcel. We're not the energy guys. We're the steel guys, but they produce, they provide electricity to us 24/7, 365. Like any power company, they have stress on their grid from now and then from extremely hot weather in the summertime that they work with us when they have to make energy reductions and the like. But the solar piece of this doesn't really change any of that, because it's feeding the grid. And definitely they're getting more out of the daylight hours than they are out of the night hours. But it's providing 24-hour electricity needs for us.
Okay, fantastic. I mean, I know that's important. My ghost host, Janet, I don't see any other questions. So if I'm missing them, maybe you can help me. But I don't see any other questions. I can continue chatting with Jeff and David with no problem, because I have got more questions of my own.
I think one, Mark, that you had mentioned yesterday when we spoke is why a new rail mill? What is what's the driver behind that? Obviously, we have kind of a working museum across the street over there right now. Was in there, the existing rail mill not long ago, and we have a big old flywheel in there with the date stamped of 1910 on it that's still in operation. So we've got a lot of old equipment. So that's part of the driver for us, is it's just time to make the shift from analog to digital, so to speak, going to a much higher form of automation in this new mill with new state-of-the-art equipment. But the other big part of this is currently we produce 80-foot rails. Those 80-foot rails get welded with one of our partners here in town. There's Holland Company and Progress Rail. They both have welders, and they'll weld them into 18 or 1,600-foot strings, and then they get loaded into what they call rail trains, which have 50 or 54 pockets on them of each of those 1,600-foot strings, and then they get taken out to the railroads and offloaded online. But in those 1,600-foot strings, there's 19 welds currently, and we're going to make 320-foot rails in the new mill, not 80-footers, but 320. Wow. So that means each of those 1,600-foot strings will have 4 welds in it. So it's a reduction of 15 welds. Well, who does that matter to? That matters to the railroads. They're looking for rails that are really 3 things on the rail side. They're looking for that long rail to reduce those welds. Welds have a higher propensity to defect in time, and stress and tonnages and things like that. So there have that many fewer welds. They care about safe rail, alloying, metallurgy. We hire some of the best metallurgists in the country right out of Colorado School of Mines. We have 2 PhDs on staff that have chemically designed the best rail in the world today, what we call safe rail, because it's has outstanding fracture toughness. And then lastly, the railroads want long-lasting rail. So good head-hardened steel premium that lasts a long time. So we're able to produce rail that has all those benefits right here. And this new rail mill certainly helps us on that long rail journey that's so important to our customers as well.
Very interesting. Thanks. I've got a question here from either of you, from my friend Alex Seegers. Alex has an awesome site selection practice in the U.S. and Europe, and her question is: were there any special technical requirements for the solar field, wind loads, for example, technical specifications, special foundations? Do either of you gentlemen know of any special technical requirements that were related to Bighorn?
I don't. I know they employ a very skilled, high expertise workforce there at LightSource BP, with engineers that design these things. It's not the first one they've built out there. So I think they know the risks and they know the different loads that are put on that equipment, the hazards and such. And I don't want to speak for them, but I'm sure all those things were taken into account. David, do you have any idea what the LightSource BP, what the selection process is when you do something like this? Are there bids, or any idea how that works? I'm not sure. I'm not sure the history of it.
I think I can comment to some degree on that if you don't mind me chiming in.
Please.
This is actually part of it. This component of it is also part of Xcel Energy's entire energy allocation plan. So I think they went through a bid process on it, because there's a portion of it was EVRAZ, but also there was additional requirements as they were looking to close down 2 of those coal-fired plants, whose purposes I mentioned were to serve EVRAZ, but they also serve some of the Front Range, just not the city of Pueblo. And so it was part of a larger project, which was closing down the 2 fired plants, EVRAZ solar project, but also allocation of solar facilities, wind facilities, storage facilities around the state of Colorado. So I believe that went through a full RFP with Xcel Energy for that side of it.
Jeff, any idea where the panels were sourced in the U.S. or abroad? Any idea how that was determined?
My understanding, I think it was abroad, but I don't think I can speak to that. Working with, at the time, some panel manufacturers. Of course, that was during the time frame when there was a question on whether over the tariffs on the solar panels, but I'm not sure exactly where they were sourced.
Okay, understand. Jeff, from a economic development career perspective, I've just got to ask. I mean, if you look back in 20 years, what's going to be your reflection on this whole process in your career? Is it a deal of a lifetime? How is it going to impact Pueblo? What if it didn't happen? What's your perspective on how this is going to be looked at from a historical perspective?
Yeah, is it a career one? It certainly potentially. I mean, I hope we don't run into them that have these kind of challenges. That have this kind of vast scope. I think we're optimistic that we'll see, projects that are greater in capacity as far as capital and the job numbers, because we've got the experience to do it. But it's, I guess, to answer it the flip way, which you commented was, what would have happened if it didn't? So we joked internally, said, because some of our partners have been in the room when the steel industry in late 70s and 80s crashed in our employment. I said, we may see that type of, not to that degree, but we're going to see something very significant. And I think what was pointed out by EVRAZ with somebody inside of it, he says, it's not a quick death, it's a slow death, right? Because steel mills don't close overnight. It's a slow kind of a painful process. So we looked at it really as, what is the community going to look like if it's not, if we're not successful in doing it? I think what's nice about it from a career perspective is that for the next 50 years, we're going to probably see that facility out there, knowing at least the community did what they needed to do to keep it in place. But more than that, it's a model for other projects. So we can model this project to other projects we can bring in and show them how this deal was put together and how this is possible in the community with all the moving pieces. So certainly it's got the potential to be the highlight. You look back at it, it's definitely one of the highlights.
Great. David, what's your career takeaway? What's your reflection going to be in 20 years?
Well, the state of Colorado was famous for pioneers, people that wanted to go west to find a better life or gold in those hills. And I think Jeff and the community of Pueblo really, along with all of these companies that have come together, are pioneers in what I think is going to be regarded as one of the first projects of this type, of many more to come around this country and probably around the continent or around the world for that matter. So I think we've just scratched the surface on what's possible. Clearly renewable energy is just part of every company's vernacular now. Things they're doing with ESG. That surprised me too. 10 years ago, if I thought boardrooms would care about stuff like this, I never would have believed it. But it's important to corporations. It's important to companies, and that's a good thing for all of us and for our children and their children. So I think we've been pioneers on this project.
Do you think you'll see other steel mills following suit, other parts of the U.S. or the world?
I know they're looking at it. We're looking at it internally, ourselves. We have other locations in Canada and Oregon and clearly overseas as well. We've been pioneers within our own company. So it's being looked at all over the place right now.
The interesting asset that you have that from a site selection perspective is very important. You had 1,800 acres, apparently.
And that's exactly right. The one thing Pueblo has that a lot of those other locations don't, there's more than one thing. We had land, we also had water, and we have plenty of sunshine. To run a solar field, you need sunshine, and Colorado gets over 300 days of sunshine a year, and Pueblo's kind of the hot spot in the state on top of it. So it's really an ideal location for solar, an ideal location for steel and rail supply to the rail industry as well. And, I mentioned it before, PEDCO, huge part of this for us, Pueblo Urban Renewal, City of Pueblo, City Council, Mayor's Office, and State of Colorado. It took really all of those parties to make this happen. And then just our customer base, for really signing up with us for the long term from a supply standpoint. Union Pacific, BNSF, Canadian Pacific, Canadian National. So it takes a lot of people to make something like this successful. And, Jeff was kind of the quarterback of all of it. So.
Well, it's, I have to say, and we're going to have to close. This has been one of the more inspirational stories I've seen of retention, expansion, growth, with a sprinkle of green energy on top. I mean, I think there's really a lot that all of us can learn from this, and it's just been a really interesting hour. But unfortunately, it's over. But thanks to you two gentlemen, David and Jeff, for helping get this organized and for your work in making it successful, because I think it really is an example to many others, and to everybody that's on our call today. Thanks so much for joining. We hope you have good comments on the session, and I just think this story is quite fascinating. So I'm gonna close at the hour, but again, thank both of you gentlemen, and thank everyone else. Have a safe afternoon, and we'll go from there. Okay.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, Mark.
Au revoir. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.